Welcome to Something More with Chris Boyd. Chris Boyd is a certified financial planner practitioner and senior vice president and financial advisor at Wealth Enhancement Group, one of the nation's largest registered investment advisors. We call it Something More because we'd like to talk not only about those important dollar and cents issues, but also the quality of life issues that make the money matters matter. Here he is, your fulfillment facilitator, your partner in prosperity, advising clients on Cape Cod and across the country. Here's your host, J. Christopher Boyd.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Something More. I'm here with Jeff Perry and Russ Ball. We are of the AMR team at Wealth Enhancement Group. Glad to have you with us. House of Representatives successfully did it. They were trying to get something passed before Memorial Day weekend. So last week, the One Big Beautiful Bill, as it's known as, did successfully get passed by the House of Representatives. Now, that doesn't make it law. As we remember our Schoolhouse Rock,
That's right.
Has to go to the Senate. And then in this case, unless it's the same bill, it has to go back to the House for final agreement, approval of things. They hash things out. And then assuming everyone's in agreement, it goes to the president for signature before it becomes law. So there's a lot of things that could change still, but we're going to talk about some of the highlights of what appear to be, at least preliminarily, in this bill. So just at a high level, there's so much. What is this thing? Another 1,000-page bill, you know?
Right.
So I was going to tease and say, well, you have to pass it before you can read it, but that was a different
that was the healthcare
legislation.
Bill. Yeah, that Nancy Pelosi said. Yeah,
right.
Yep.
So in any case, for fun, let's warped sense of fun, I'll grant you, but let's go through some of what we've got in this proposed legislation. Jeff, I think maybe we should start with a lot of this is intended to extend or make permanent some of the features of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act from 2017.
Well, you referenced the so-called bill, whatever your language was, but that's the title of this bill. This is House One. One Big Beautiful Bill is the title of the bill. And, a long time ago when our founding fathers were debating this new system, they talked about something called the single subject rule, where you only put items related to each other, like spending, or if there was a tax bill, that would be separate, or if there's a border bill, that would be separate, or if there was this bill or that bill, they'd all be separate. This is not that. This is this is the One Big Beautiful Bill, which is an attempt, in my view, to pass through the promises that candidate Trump made. And I think he wants one bill, obviously, based on the name. You can see his influence on it. But he wants one bill because the next election is pretty far away. And these are his agenda items. The closer it gets to the next election, the more that congressmen are worried about their votes. So this is a bill that's full of things that he promised on the campaign trail. And you're right to point out that a signature part of this bill is the making permanent the tax rates that were under the Tax and Jobs Act. They are sunsetting this year if we don't continue them.
Yeah.
And this House version, which did pass by a whopping one vote, 215 to 214, right?
And I think a couple of presents just to allow it to get through, right? Yeah.
A present vote is, you've turned my arm so much that I
won't vote against it, but I won't vote for it. Yeah.
No one's going to be able to hold the roll call up and me have a Y next to it for yes.
Yeah.
It's a very political vote, non-vote. But yes, so the signature piece, there's a lot to talk about, as you mentioned, but the signature piece is making these tax cuts permanent, no more sunsetting. And I think, I don't know, most people love a tax cut, so I don't think that's the foundational problem with the bill. There's a lot of missteps, but there's a lot of other things. Just to go through a few of the highlights from to make it political for a minute, of the things that he promised, right? So he promised the tax cuts. He promised that he would make No taxes on tips and overtime, which is in the bill.
Yeah.
President Trump promised more money for the border. There's more money for the border in there. He promised more military spending. There's more military spending in there, including something that was not discussed, which is a hilarious name if you think about it. $25 billion for the Golden Dome.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh,
I mean,
boy.
you gotta laugh. I mean, this is all on purpose, obviously. So some of his signature things are in there. I think the one missing thing out of all that, and there's a lot more that we can talk about, but just to not talk the whole time, I think the missing thing are significant cuts to spending. If that's one of his with Doge and one of the promises that was made to the American people, it is not achieved in this one big beautiful bill.
No, I think there's expectation that this would cause increases. And to recall what the number was, 3.8 trillion, I think, over 10 years. However, that's a little bit misleading, I think, because we're already outspending. So it's not to say that over 10 years our Congress would only outspend their revenues by 3.8 trillion. It's that this would just add an additional $3.8 trillion. So if we're outspending, I don't know, $1 to $2 trillion a year, depending on how you want to calculate it, but this would add, another 3.8 trillion on top of that, 1 to 2 trillion a year for the next 10 years. Then you're putting another, call it $4 trillion on top of that.
Right. This is nothing close to a balanced budget for sure.
Right.
And adding to the national debt of another roughly $400 million on the top of the shortfall we already have.
Jeff, this is a little off topic, but given, I know your preferred approach to policy would be lower taxes to generate more economic revenue, that's the way you'd ideally facilitate a way to get out of this, cut costs, cut spending, and not raise taxes type of an approach. Do you think that's possible at this point with the amount of deficits we're running? Do you think that we can cut our spending sufficiently to not have to raise taxes?
I think it's possible, like mathematically possible, if the federal government focused in on what the role of the federal government should be and what most of us can agree what it should be. But I don't think it's politically possible at this time. Too much.
It would take a long runway maybe for the reduced rate of spending. Like if you said, oh, we're going to not just cut spending, but curb the growth of spending as a way to try to do it. But even that, I really am, as much as, I love the idea of being able to do that. I just am at a point where you look at what's in government spending and like, it's where would you cut? You know what I mean? So there's a limit to how much you can cut. And when we think about entitlements having some shortfalls on the horizon, we talk about Social Security more readily. We don't talk about Medicare all that much, but I know that's a similar kind of challenge that, it just strikes me as probably going to be a painful rude awakening at some point where we're getting the benefit of lower taxes now, but that may not be the case, a decade from now, or maybe less than that. And so, I think when it comes to planning, clients and listeners should, if this passes, take advantage of the window you have with lower tax rates, because it's going to be challenging to keep those rates lower in the future.
Yeah. Anything you said about my political philosophy is true. So I'm going to put that out there as I'm not disagreeing with your description of it.
Yeah.
I'd go even further. I think this
I mean, that would
bill.
be my preference too. Don't get me wrong.
I
Yeah.
think I'm more with Senator Rand Paul
Yeah.
in the Senate, who has said this bill is still too bloated. And, the president made some big promises that aren't in the bill that would have saved money. Whether or not you agree with them, but I think it has to do with your role, your view of your role of government. And I think one of the compelling statements from Republicans, including President Trump, but long before President Trump, including President Reagan, that's how far back we can go with this, was the elimination of the Department of Education. I mean, it's not going to save the budget. Don't get me wrong, but it is a fundamental discussion, debate of whether or not that is the role of government,
the federal government,
right, to collect tax dollars from all the taxpayers and then just basically give them back to the states in different forms, right? And the cost
to facilitate certain activities
policy
that
goals,
are
right?
policy objectives. Yeah.
That's not, in my view, the role of the federal government. In fact, the word education isn't in the Constitution. And so if you're a strict conservative, and President Trump is not, I'll argue with people all day about this, you would be trying to get back to those principles about what the federal government's role is. And arguably, part of the reason, a significant reason that we have such a budget deficit and national debt is we're doing things far beyond. And the reductions that President Trump talked about during the campaign, and others, Republicans, for decades, are simply not in this bill.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not going to challenge you on any of that, but I think when it comes to, neither is the Social Security and Medicare in the Constitution or any of you can point to those types of things, but they are at this point, I think, social contracts that it'd be hard to change your direction on that. I'm not sure there's a political will to do that. You get to the point where we can probably make that same challenge on where are we with healthcare and stuff, which again, not really, something that the role of federal government should have a hand in, other than maybe on a regulatory, basis. But that it just becomes a challenge as to how do you navigate these issues, right?
I'd separate out Social Security and Medicare. Those are entitlements that are earned by payment of additional taxes.
Yeah.
So I do put them in a different category than some of these other subjects, for sure.
Yeah, it's a good discussion, probably worthy of its own show.
It is.
Yeah.
My point is not to get into the specifics of any of these things, but I was, starting with the positives, that a number of the president's initiatives that he talked about in the campaign are in this one big beautiful bill. But if you were to give him a grade about the percentage of the things that are in the bill, I'm not sure it's a passing grade, because these cuts, DOGE, for better for worse, was supposed to be the initial kickstart to identifying things that that many of us fiscal conservatives looked at and said, okay, they're going to dig in, they're going to identify cuts that will be in the budget. The thing, and the courts went right along with that. They stopped the president from making unilateral cuts because they're part of the budget process. They're part of the congressional process. The president didn't have the executive power to make certain cuts. So it was logical to me that the things that came out of DOGE, the campaign, or the new administration would be included in this one big beautiful bill to try to offset some of this additional spending and giveaways. I mean, how much does it cost us not to tax overtime? Sure, it's a great thing. It's a great campaign speech, but we can't just keep giving things away. To your point about taxes, can we do it? Well, we can do it, but we can't do it by taxing even at this now permanent lower rate, perhaps, if it passes the Senate.
Yeah, if it were to become permanent.
We've taken, I don't know the figure, I haven't seen it yet, but hundreds of millions, billions of dollars off the table that won't be taxed because they were in the form of tips and or overtime.
Right.
One piece. Sorry, Chris. One piece that is important to note is that while it's being called permanent, it's permanent for now, I think. kind of to your point, if we were saying for planning purposes that it's always going to be these tax rates going forward indefinitely, a lot of plans would be looking pretty great, especially when it comes to the amount we're paying in taxes. But realistically, that might not be the case. Permanent is until the rules change. So that's what I keep reading, at least from what I'm seeing.
You're right. And the next administration could, another Congress could outdo it. And as far as permanent, the reduction or the elimination of taxes on tips and overtime is not permanent. There is a sunset. I think it's 3 years or something.
Mm-hmm.
Let's hit on some of the characteristics in here. I think we expect if this becomes law, which again, stay tuned. There's a lot that has to happen before that's the case. It does maintain some small business deduction. Was this the 20% deduction of qualified small businesses? It's the alternative minimum tax changes that made that a higher threshold before people have to worry about the alternative minimum tax would be extended. When it comes to the estate tax, instead of it reverting to, what was it going to be, $7 million or something? It would keep the threshold high, perhaps somewhere around $15 million. Individual tax rates, we were just talking about these, the rate of tax and the bands of income that put you into which tax bracket. Keep in mind, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act raised the income levels before you hit the next band of higher tax rate and lowered the rates within each of those bands. So it's a lower tax rate for most people. When it came to the standard deduction, it elevated the standard deduction so that most people don't have to itemize. They're benefited by a rather large standard deduction. So that would all be made permanent. What were some of the other things? Corporate tax breaks, how did that work out? There were a variety of things that happened in the corporate tax space. Oh, the SALT tax. Let me go back to that.
Right.
The state and local tax, instead of it being $10,000 cap for those, your real estate tax bill as an example, there'd be up to $40,000. Was it 40 or 50,000? 40,000, right?
I'd be very surprised if that one survives.
It'll get beat up a little bit.
Yeah.
Child tax credit would be increased for a period of time. Was it like 5 years, I think? Do you guys remember? It's through 2028. I see it here, to $2,500, and then which I think it's around $2,000 now. Would go to $2,000 thereafter.
The tax credits for the electric vehicles and the energy efficient stuff basically disappear in this new bill.
I heard. I just was getting the impression that seems also like a something that's probably more challenged to get through the Senate. That there will be constituents who will want to keep some of that green energy development and encouragement, in the tax code, particularly as it relates to different jurisdictions that have more impact, benefit from that. What are your thoughts on that?
In the House process, where it was razor thin, obviously, certain things had to be given to get certain votes, and there are a number of congressmen Republican congressmen who live in blue states.
Yeah.
And so they were pushing, no vote unless they get SALT, right?
SALT, which is the higher income tax states are affected by that. Yeah.
And many of these things like the child tax credit and Medicaid we haven't talked about it, but Medicaid is a big issue with some senators who have been very vocal about it. I know of 2 senators who have said they won't vote for the House bill because of the reductions to Medicaid spending.
Yeah, just tell a little bit about that. It went from right now, Medicaid is covered about half by the state and half by the federal funding. They were looking to change that dramatically,
They want to
right?
push more on the states, and they also want a big part of the bill, which I'm in favor of. It's controversial, but I'll state I'm in favor of it. Is work requirements,
Hmm.
and they're not just work. So this is all part of a compromise that you had. Don't get me wrong. I think it's 80 hours a month, but that could have changed. That you had to have employment, education, or community involvement,
And
volunteering.
what is meant by able-bodied, I guess, remains to be clarified to some extent, right?
Right, and there's an exception for a mother who has a child under a certain age, and all this stuff. But the work requirement, I think, has a place. I don't think there's any reason that people eligible for free benefits who just are able to and make no effort at all to support themselves at all. I think we saw that in President Clinton's tenure with welfare reform and work requirements, and it was very successful by reducing welfare and motivating people to get out in the workforce. So my larger point is when we get to the Senate, uh, there are less individual things that matter to a given congressional district, and it's more larger philosophical points of view that take root.
Hmm.
Such as Rand Paul, senator from Kentucky. He's not talking about a specific part of the bill. He's talking about big spending. A couple senators are just talking about the Medicaid process itself. So I think there'll be more policy driven than this giveaway or that negotiation on this particular element. And so back to your kind of question about green energy and electric vehicles, that goes more to a policy of do you want the tax policy of the United States to be favorable towards green energy and energy efficiency or not?
Yeah.
And so I could see there being a few Republican senators who will support maintaining the status quo, and they wouldn't have the votes to keep it in there.
And what is there, about a three senator majority right now?
They can lose 3 votes. There's 53 Republican senators. They can lose 3, and then if it was a tie, the vice president would come in and be the
Yeah,
tiebreaker.
presumably push it over the edge.
So I haven't seen any issue with 3. I mean, with 4 senators, but we'll see. It's the stated goal from both congressional leaders, Senator Thune, and obviously the House met its initial step, was to have the bill signed by July 4th.
Let's come back to talking about that in just another moment. I want to just cover a couple of other things that we maybe hadn't included, that were in the like overview of this.
Hmm.
I think there was something about a limit on what are tax remittances sent abroad? Is that meaning if I pay foreign taxes, I'm limited on how much benefit I get from paying those taxes?
You
And
got me
I
on
think
that one.
I think there's a cap on that.
Yeah,
And then there was content about university endowments that
sure.
going
Yeah.
to try and tax them more. And then nonprofits, it grants the U.S. Treasury Department the authority to revoke tax exempt status for nonprofits um, deemed to support terrorism.
I
That
think that
sounds pretty political, don't you think?
I think it's a restatement of the current law and political in nature. That
Yeah.
the U.S. Treasury and the IRS specifically already have the authority to revoke nonprofit status if they're not complying with the nonprofit rules.
Yeah, exactly. But I think this seems like it's trying to politicize some of what's been
Well,
going
I
on
think
with.
I think both
Yeah.
of that and the college endowments are taking shots at these big universities, which tend to be more liberal and have allegations of supporting activities among students or allowing it that are arguably anti-Semitic, and trying to put some pressure on them to change their posture with that.
Other comments about the bill. So we talked about the deficit. It said there was about 2 trillion in spending cuts, that you talked about a lot of that in Medicaid,
Hmm.
the food stamps program, SNAP, I
Snap.
think you mentioned, clean energy as well. And then you started talking about this issue. So just the probabilities of its success in the Senate. Um, so it does seem that uh, it's not going to be an easy walk in the park to get this through, right?
I don't
Um,
think so. The president has shown great influence over the party on
yeah,
getting pieces through the legislative process. Um, we talked about the House turning a couple of reps into firm no's to I'm here, but I'm not voting. And
yeah.
that's not an easy thing to do, especially when you consider who these reps are. They're pretty influential and pretty ideological. So I'm I won't be surprised if the Senate gets it done. I'll be surprised if it's the same. So process wise, which may not be in that it's a bill video, but if the Senate passes something different than the House, amends it, writes their own, it has to go back to the House for an up or down vote. They accept it or they don't. So the House is kind of at an inferior position at that point. If they reject it or don't have the votes to pass it, would be more accurate. The process actually would have to basically start over.
Oof.
On a good note, process-wise, it's possible that the United States, for the first time in a very long time, could have a bill passed before the fiscal year starts and goes for the whole year.
That would be amazing, right? When
Wouldn't
you
it?
think
I
about
mean,
it. Yeah. I mean, it sounds so foolish, um, but it would be amazing. We haven't had that in a
we've
long
had
time.
supplemental budgets, debt ceilings,
Yeah.
all these different terms that were uh, needed to.
Well, to that point, let's just talk about, I think there's the risk of volatility over the summer that investors should keep in mind. So we've got
Mhm.
this issue, the passage of this legislation. Isn't there like is the debt ceiling is its own uh, conversation? It's not. Is it tied to the bill?
I believe so. I don't know if it made it into the House version, but there was a provision in the discussion about the debt ceiling. I don't know if it made it.
The debt ceiling is one of these issues that is kind of looming out there kind of soon, right?
Mhm.
We're already into those emergency measures and all that kind of stuff. And the timeline on that's coming up. We've
I think
got
it's before this bill. With this bill, if passed, would take an effect October 1st.
because of that issue, or saying?
No, because
Or,
this
uh,
is the budget.
oh, the budget's fiscal year, right?
Right.
October.
So issues with the debt ceiling are certainly relevant and independent of this bill.
So I think we've got that issue outstanding. Then you've got the negotiations, the 90-day delay for most countries comes back to for tariff topic on July 9th,
That's
and
right.
for China is sometime in August. Do you remember the August? Anyway, it's around about a month later, roughly. So, this summer we've got a variety of um, topics coming up that we want to pay attention to.
Mhm.
This being one of the, if we get this legislation passed, I do think that would give markets a little bit of enthusiasm around expectations for the economy and so forth, that this would be a favorable step.
I agree.
We got the tariffs, which I think remain
Hmm.
somewhat elusive as to what to expect, and the economic consequence of that.
Hmm.
Though, there's an effort to suggest that there are deals in the works, that kind of thing. But what will actually come to fruition in a relatively short time,
Hmm.
or whether will we kick the can another 90 days or, that kind of thing. We saw the president in the last week do a little bit more social media posting about some of the challenges that are to come, perhaps positioning, but again, one of these challenges scares the markets a bit. We saw at the back end of last week. We'll see. And then this debt ceiling thing hopefully gets packaged into this a little bit to get us past that, because that's another. We've seen this before where, political chicken,
Right.
can be problematic. So certainly to market confidence. So lots to watch for. If you are not inclined to do this yourself, you may want to talk to a financial advisor, because I'll tell you, we're paying attention. There's a lot to pay attention to.
Sure.
And but anyway, if you need any help in dealing with your investments or financial planning, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Until next time, everybody, keep striving for something more.
Thank you for listening to Something More with Chris Boyd. Call us for help, whether it's for financial planning or portfolio management, insurance concerns, or those quality of life issues that make the money matters matter. Whatever's on your mind, visit us at somethingmorewithchrisboyd.com or call us toll free at 866-771-8901. Or send us your questions to amr-info@wealthenhancement.com. You're listening to Something More with Chris Boyd Financial Talk Show. Wealth Enhancement Advisory Services and J. Christopher Boyd provide investment advice on an individual basis to clients only. Proper advice depends on a complete analysis of all facts and circumstances. The information given on this program is general financial comments and cannot be relied upon as pertaining to your specific situation. Wealth Enhancement Group cannot guarantee that using the information from this show will generate profits or ensure freedom from loss. Listeners should consult their own financial advisors or conduct their own due diligence before making any financial decisions.